Protesters greeted RNC patrons as they left the event, and right-wing radicals are upset about it because apparently they're not in favor of any form of protest, whether it's peaceful protests like Colin Kaepernick kneeling, or protests that actually confront people in positions of power who are supposed to represent their own constituents. Rand Paul is no exception, and so here's what the scene looked like last night. Now, I want to emphasize that no one laid a finger on Rand Paul. We all saw the video. There was one moment where the cop next to Rand Paul pushed one of the protesters. The protester pushed back and the cop lost his balance. But other than that, the situation might have felt a little scary for Rand Paul, but no one assaulted him and no one physically attacked him, despite what the radical right would have you believe in this country. So Paul talked about this later during an interview on Fox and Friends. Let's hear what he had to say.
Senator, good morning. That looked scary.
Yeah, my wife and I, it was horrific. As we walked one block, we could see some police in the distance, but we also saw a mob of about 30 people marching and yelling. They all of a sudden saw me right as we got to the policeman, fortunately, or I don't think we'd have survived. And as they came closer, they were shouting my name, and the crowd doubled to 60, and then it doubled again to 120. The crowd was getting bigger and bigger and pushing in. They were yelling threats. They were trying to push the police over to get to me. They were grabbing at us, and it got worse and worse and worse, and they were shouting threats, to us to kill us, to hurt us. But they're also shouting, say her name, Breonna Taylor. And it's like, you couldn't reason with this mob, but I'm actually the author of the Breonna Taylor law to end no-knock raids. So the irony is lost on these idiots that they're trying to kill the person who's actually trying to get rid of no-knock raids.
That's interesting. I didn't see anyone trying to kill Rand Paul. I saw a group of people who are frustrated with the lack of change in this country, with the rhetoric that we're getting specifically from conservatives like Rand Paul, who tried to justify his blocking of an anti-lynching law legislation. He blocked that from becoming law. And he's right. He did author the no-knock warrant legislation, but he's also a senator from the state of Kentucky, where the 3 cops who murdered Breonna Taylor are still out on the loose. They have not been charged, and there has been no justice in that story, in that case, even given the fact that there's evidence showing that these cops lied to a judge in order to obtain a no-knock warrant and intrude on Breonna Taylor's home. And so he's got power. Rand Paul has power. Why isn't he making a big deal about the fact that Breonna Taylor was gunned down and there's absolutely no justice in that case? And why was he so vocal against a bipartisan piece of legislation, bipartisan, Republicans wanted this too, that would make lynching a federal crime? That happened just a few months ago. And look, I actually would prefer, Jayar, that we were in a situation where people didn't feel the need to confront politicians this way. But we need to ask, why has it gotten to this point? Because this didn't happen overnight.
No, and so when you get yourself out in the street and decide to go and walk through people and then they start yelling at you, sure, it could have been intimidating. You might want to avoid it, number one. So first do that. But the story he was telling as he's going through, it sounded like the way you tell a story to your 5-year-old kid before bed. It's like they kept getting larger and larger and bigger still, and even more, and then scarier and then scarier, and then it got closer and closer. Like, bro, we don't need to be coddled into your fear mongering. Number one. Number two, how do you know? I'm just gonna start. I'm sorry to poke holes in this guy's story. You saw 30 people from a block away. There were protesters. You saw a couple of cops and you walked towards them. Then it grew to 60. Then it doubled to 120. how do you know how many numbers of people there were that quickly and easily? I thought you were fearing for your life. It was also in this story because he told her for 10 minutes. Also in the story, he said, I don't think they were gonna kill us. And then a few minutes later, he goes, they were gonna kill us. Which one is it, Rand? So it's just, I'm just getting into his mindset of how he really wasn't concerned. But even if he was, ask yourself, why are people so upset? Just because they're thugs and violent protesters out to come and kill you and your wife and your two friends that you were walking there along with. And so when the Breonna Taylor, these idiots, as he called them, Breonna Taylor asking, say her name, I'm the author of the bill. Where's the bill? Has it been passed yet? Is it still a bill? Are you a senator? Have you been advocating for this bill to get put up for a vote? Have you been calling on Mitch McConnell for blocking any kind of legislation that will do anything about no-knock warrants? Number one. Number two, this is willful ignorance about what the anger is over Breonna Taylor from the no-knock warrants. It's she's dead, and the people that killed her are still walking around sipping tea and celebrating. What have you done about that, Rand Paul? You've done nothing about that. You haven't even mentioned it, and you don't even know how to pronounce her name. So for this bill that you've offered up that's done nothing, why aren't you pushing for your bill? Because when you have tax cut bills and all these bills to help out President Trump, you're definitely advocating for those. It sounds like you don't give a damn about this bill that you authored and just use it every once in a while to deflect from people talking about your lack of action.
Bingo, 100% bingo. And I'm not interested in having a discussion about how there's left-wing terrorism in this country because Rand Paul and his wife decided to walk into a crowd of protesters who didn't lay a finger on him. I am interested in talking about radical right-wing terrorism in this country, which actually is a big problem, not based on what I believe, but based on data that's been published by the FBI. So I'll get to those details in just a second. But since the right wing loves to harp on anecdotal evidence, I'll go ahead and hit you with some anecdotal evidence. What about the armed protesters that showed up to the Michigan State Capitol because they were so upset about having to wear masks and having to stay home in the middle of a pandemic that has already killed nearly 180,000 Americans in this country? Do you want to remember what that scene looked like? I remember, but I can refresh your memory.
You policemen are all cowards. You betrayed us. The police have betrayed the people. You work for socialist radicals. You enjoy the people's rights being taken from them.
Thought you were getting respectable positions and realized nobody respects you. Nobody respects anything you guys do. You guys are not first responders.
Is this what you want? You deny right. Aisle to Whitmer. Aisle to Whitmer. No more aisle to Whitmer. Aisle to Whitmer.
Yeah, that's right. They're armed. They're screaming Heil Hitler. They're also, some of them were able to get into the actual room where people were, state legislators were trying to decide whether they were going to reopen businesses, and they were screaming at them with their guns, completely, across their shoulders. Oh, Heil to Whitmer. Okay, my bad. Yeah. I thought he said Heil Hitler. My bad. Okay, so Heil to Whitmer. But anyway, and there were state lawmakers who were terrified because you have armed people in the room threatening you, screaming at you as you're trying to make important decisions about what the state should do in the middle of a pandemic. But that was okay. That was just good law-abiding citizens practicing their First Amendment rights. Like, we can totally whitewash what happened during that day. And then of course the Bundy standoff that happened in 2014, that was when you had armed right-wingers engaging in a standoff with police officials in 2014, that was okay. And again, far right-wing terrorism has significantly outpaced terrorism from other types of perpetrators, including from far left networks and individuals inspired by the Islamic State and Al-Qaeda. Right-wing attacks and plots account for the majority of all terrorist incidents in the United States since 1994, and the total number of right-wing attacks and plots has grown significantly during the past 6 years. Right-wing extremists perpetrated 2/3 of the attacks and plots in the United States in 2019, and over 90% between January 1st and May 8th of 2020.
More stats that we need to hear from people whenever you're confronted with people talking about how violent the left is. Hey, there's actual stats to talk about how bad this has gotten and that your president has done nothing about it and it's grown since. There's a direct cause and effect to what's going on.
Thanks for watching the Young Turks. Really appreciate it. Another way to show support is through YouTube memberships. You'll get to interact with us more. There's live chat emojis, badges. You've got emojis of me, Anna, John, Jayar. So those are super fun. But you also get playback of our exclusive member-only shows and specials right after they air. So all of that, all you gotta do is click that join button right underneath the video. Thank you.